Hello, 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 and welcome back to Footy Rants after a rep round hiatus. I didn't post any content around rep round, so I do apologise, but after that, we are back. Before we sort of dive into the round 10 preview, I just sort of thought I'd drop my 2 cents worth on the recent drug scandals within the NRL itself. Obviously, it's a horrible look for the game, and as many experts have sort of commented on, it's a shame that that's the headline that has marred rep round when we want to try and draw attention to the efforts that a number of people are making to improve rugby league as a world sport and put different countries on the map. And that was definitely evident on the weekend. A lot of the Pacific nation countries have vastly improved. You look at their rosters and how much NRL experience is in each of the developing nations, those second tier sides, and it's really pleasing to see. But I guess my position that I'll present forward sort of comes off the back of an article that Brent Tate wrote in Big League that came out today. So that's available for everyone to see. And my issue around some of the comments made, and a lot of comments made around this issue, is the term drug itself. As soon as you start saying, there's a drug problem, anyone who takes drugs, we need to take a hard stance on drugs and ban players from the game, and it's a one chance policy. You start to develop this negative connotation around the word drug and what that actually means. Yet we actually forget that a lot of society is dependent on drugs, whether that's in a positive or a negative sense. And there are positive drugs out there that are used in a negative connotation. So, for example, you've got prescription drugs, obviously designed to help people, but can most definitely be used in a negative sense, especially pain medication. When you start talking about, people need to stop taking drugs and we need to set examples as role models as professional NRL players, you have to realize then, okay, well, that taking illicit drugs, so things that are illegal, yes, that's a different case. But as soon as you just start saying drugs, well, I think that the game, it's not just athletes that have, where there is this inherent drug problem. It's more than a cultural thing of rugby league as there being a drug problem. It's the way that society depicts drugs in general. So we've sort of glossed over the fact that, there's probably a number of NRL players right now that have a prescription drug problem. We've seen things in the past where players were taking certain things and mixing it with energy drinks and stuff like that. But I know that the availability that certain players have with prescription drugs, with pain medication, it doesn't matter where they are in the country, they can call their doctor up, get a prescription straight away, go to their nearest chemist and pick up whatever they need, that there's no questions asked. So in my opinion, there's damage to be had around those areas as well when we just start using the term drug. Another perfect example is alcohol. So are you telling me that someone can't develop a harrowing alcohol problem and that's not as bad or just as bad as having a cocaine problem, but it's quite socially okay and socially acceptable that we as a society go out and drink alcohol on the weekend, and that is a drug. Alcohol is a drug. So when you start using that term drug, you're starting to negate things that are a part of society and are accepted and legal. All these things are legal, but they can cause so much damage. So to go and say that, you should ban players who take cocaine for a whole year, yet you can go out and drink alcohol, it just doesn't add up to me. Like, you can't tell me that there isn't functioning alcoholics and there aren't functioning cocaine users, And when we create this little niche bubble where these players have enormous amounts of money in comparison to our economy and an average wage, because these athletes do. If we're comparing to American sport, obviously it's nowhere near, can't even compete. But in comparison to our society, they are earning vast amounts of money, and we put them in this social bubble where they don't work similar hours. That is their profession, which is 90% of the population's hobby, and then you're giving them vast quantities of cash for this. They're then required to be of peak physical condition. They're going to start weighing up these odds. So just to paint an example, I've got shit tons of money coming in. What costs heaps of money? Cocaine, in comparison to something like alcohol. Then I've got vast amounts of downtime. I'm not filling that with anything, I might just do a tick and flick and I'm doing some sort of cert, so the NRL and the club's off my back. Then from there, alcohol causes a lot more damage in the process of recovery. So if I'm taking a stimulant, which is cocaine, that's going to offset the negative impacts that alcohol has on my performance the days prior. So I can go and drink copious amounts of alcohol, combine that with a cocktail of cocaine and pills and whatever the fuck it is, and the next day I might feel a little bit rubbish, but other than that, I'm going to be back at training on Monday and I'm back into my professional athlete, profile. And I'm sure there are thousands of players across decades that have done that. So like Andrew Johns, one of the greatest players ever played the game, came out and had a drug problem. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's just, you set certain constraints around certain populations and they're going to come up with their most viable solutions. And to be perfectly honest, to use some sort of like rationale for the Bromwich and Proctor scenario, they're in Canberra, a relatively nothing town, not much is going on. The arrogance of being a professional sportsman probably just weighed on them, like, oh, we're not going to get caught in Canberra, like nothing happens here, you know what I mean? Much like they're probably used to that bubble that they sort of live in Melbourne. It's an AFL town, like not many people recognise them. Like if they're off their guts, one night every couple of months, so be it. Again, this is not me trying to justify their actions and saying that they shouldn't take responsibility. This is just me trying to paint some pictures and how these labels become confusing or can become confusing for certain players. If you keep using the term drug, it's like, well, what is a drug? Is a drug a bad thing? Like, but I have an alcohol problem. Like, is that the same thing? Do I have a prescription med problem? Like, it starts to create so many different grey areas. Again, if you're listening to this and you have a certain position or you want to push something forward, by all means do. I love to create conversations around these scenarios that envelop player welfare and club responsibilities and game responsibilities and how we can change these things. Do I have a quick term solution? I don't know. Like, on one hand, I see a 2-game suspension for Bromwich, in a club that's renowned for their high standard. And, the statement leading into that is that this club has such high standards and Jesse will face the consequences. And then it comes back with a 2-game suspension for something that is illegal. I find that fucking really, really soft, to be honest. And even Proctor, I think he's only got 5 games. But at the same time, do I want to see them rubbed out of the game? Do I not separate them, the help that they may need as a person, to continue to educate versus rubbing them out of the game and see what would happen after that? I think that's where the greater damage can be had. These people are just like, oh, they need to be fucking thrown out of the game. Well, it's like, well, what do you think would happen in your circumstance if in your profession you developed a drug habit and then you were sacked, but then there was no support offered? Like, where would your thinking go? Do you think it's a viable option that you would just continue that behavior and that would continue to fester and impact you negatively? I think there's a definite chance that could happen. You know, could that also be a moment where you sort of pull your head in, fuck, I've had all this pulled out from under me, I really need to turn things around and set an example, and how can I learn from this? Yes, that's also a possibility. So, you know, it's this catch-22. I think it could go either way. It could be both. I don't think it's necessarily one way, another. It's both. I think something's clearly not working. Something's clearly not working, and it's something to do with the dynamics of these social bubbles and expectations that elite athletes in Australia are forced to live in. And, you know, do Bromwich and Proctor have a drug problem? We don't know. I dare say they're going to deny it if there is one. And just because, and, you know, the chance that this is the first time that they've done it is very, very low. To be caught the very first time that you did it, you'd have to be pretty unlucky. But let's say, for example, that it is. Let's take their word for it, and let's say that it is the first time that they have ever taken drugs. Does that then make them a bad person? Does that make them any less of a footballer? Does that make them any less, you know, talented than what we've seen? They were playing for their country that day. So, you know, it creates a really, really interesting discussion moving forward. And how the NRL looks to rub this out. It doesn't look good when you've got CEOs of the defending premiers club getting embroiled in these scandals. But, you know, I've spoken just over 10 minutes about this now, and yeah, again, we sort of come to no solution. I'm just sort of painting some pictures and talking out some examples of where I think the grey areas start to come out, you know. And I think the big thing is around the language. You know, a lot of times we get stuck in these situations simply because we don't have the language to support the points that we're trying to get across, or they cover too many bases. So, it's really, really unfortunate that these situations overtook what should have been a big celebration for the game moving forward, specifically for those Pacific nations, because I thought there were a lot of standout performers. Anyway, I want to move forward. I'm sure many of you guys that are listening to this have heard enough about it and want to move on and probably just like, you know, the easy solution is just rub them out the game and let's fucking keep moving forward and eventually we'll get our right crop. But I don't think that's the answer. And I think you're always going to, if you keep just booting people out, you're just making way for people lower down the chain who are more susceptible to those problems that are going to come through with it. So anyway, we move into the first game of round 10, which is tonight, which is with my beloved Cowboys up against the Canterbury Bulldogs. Couple of big pluses for the Cowboys in Jake Granville and Lachlan Coote coming back, so that will help bolster up that spine. And you know, it's a crucial game for the Cowboys. They'll want to, well, for both teams really, they need to stay with the 8. A win here keeps them moving along with the 8. The Cowboys just outside of that. They're both tied on 10 points, so they're sitting in 8th and 9th respectively. But the inclusion of Granville, Coote, and even Sean Fensom on the bench is something that will fill the Cowboys with confidence. It's a shame that they weren't back for some of those games when they were at home, and we know how well they do play at home and how poorly they do seem to play when they are away. A big plus in the Cowboys box as well is the fact that the Bulldogs will play without Josh Reynolds. We've seen that they were able to play over a half of footy without him last round, a fortnight ago, against the Raiders and get the job done. So we'll get to see a little bit more on how the combination between Frawley and Moses Mbai has come together at training over the last fortnight, and whether or not they can stand up and, especially in Sydney, and get the job done. A few other changes, unfortunately. Pat Kafusi looks like he's gone for the season for the Cowboys as well. So you've lost 2 props now, adding on top of Matt Scott. So John Asiata's been named in the front row. So, you know, that to me, it's a little bit stressful thinking that he comes on as a substitute back rower middle, you know, earlier in the season. Then he has to play 6, and now he's back starting. It's a lot of chop and change for a single player, and that consistency we've seen time and time again, looking at squads like Penrith and the Warriors, when there isn't that consistency with the team week after week, it's really, really hard to get the results that you want. So, yeah, that concerns me a little bit. But seeing Fensom on the bench, I think it'll be a matter of minutes for him, and I dare say he'll make that starting front row spot his. It's definitely his for the taking. And then just looking at the benches as well, you've got two young bucks from both sides, Adam Elliott and Cohen Hess, back to the bench. And we see Greg Eastwood and Ethan Lowe back into the starting sides. Whether that does happen, and I thought Adam Elliott played really, really well for country, scored another try, so he's proving that it's not just luck that's getting him through the last sort of month of good form for himself. So it'll be really good to see those two young fellas go at it once they do get their opportunities back on the field. And I guess that first 4 to 5 weeks where we saw Cohen Hess really develop that momentum and get those eyes on him and start talking about the origin opportunities were dictated a lot by Jonathan Thurston and his ability to create space for Cohen Hess, even though, some of his tries were just brute strength and his ability to just throw blokes off that close to the line were awesome. We've also seen that his confidence has sort of taken a bit of a hit in the last month, that JT hasn't been there. So, I like the fact that Ray Thompson's going to play halfback. I think that's a positive sign moving forward, and it's a good show of faith from Paul Green to give him that opportunity, especially now that it appears that Jonathan Thurston's going to be out for an even longer extended period of time. I can only imagine what that conversation was like between Greenie and Jonathan Thurston when they found out that it was now a shoulder injury that was going to keep him out of the game, especially because it is a one-off test. And I guess that's another question mark that I sort of have around that international game in rugby league, and why we can't just be happy with having the big three and letting those second tier nations, sort of fight it out when they need to at the end of the year as well. I think everyone deserves that opportunity to represent their country, but I think it's evident now that, you've got teams like the Cowboys now that are reeling. The Cowboys and the Maroon side are going to be reeling without Jonathan Thurston. You've got the Dragons who are without Dugan now. I think it stacks more in the box of, do we need a one-off at this time of year? We're getting towards the halfway point in the competition now. That's when bodies start to get a little bit sore and a little bit wilted, and are we better off just having a week off? You know what I mean? Like, should teams that have representative players that they're paying a lot of money for be forced to risk those players because of their reputation to play rep footy, rather than just giving everyone a week off? Like, I'd be more than happy to get halfway through the season and everyone gets a week off, freshen up and away we go. And I know you sort of look at both sides of the argument, and there's going to be teams there that they don't want the week off because they're in a big run of momentum as far as win streaks and stuff are concerned. So, it can go either way. I don't know how we go around it, but for me, I think it was at least an improvement that you don't have rep footy and you're expected to play club footy on the same weekend. But moving ahead, I don't think that you can. There's a need to have a game during the middle of the season. Yes, I know there is absolute significance in Anzac Day and the bonds that we share with New Zealand, and we should always pay homage to our forefathers, and Anzac Day is such a big day on the calendar, but I think you're seeing how much it meant for everyone at club level to play in those games, like your Melbourne Warriors games and the Roosters Dragons games. To give those people, like just club players, like young fellas, the opportunity to play on that day is imperative, and I think it got the point across enough. I don't think that we need a test match there as well, and it was played a week and a half after, so it sort of loses its shine as well. So you've got to go one or the other. I don't think there's any need to have test matches on during the week. So yeah, anyway, back to the Dogs Cowboys game. The Dogs haven't beaten the Cowboys since 2013, so again, with a few of those reshuffles, that they're a definite chance. They've proved that they're up to shutting out an informed Canberra team down there as well. that last 20 minutes of footy, there was no points scored, so they're happy to grit out a win. Any team coached by Des Hasler, they'll be very wary of Lachlan Coote and Jake Granville and Sean Fenton returning, but at the same time, they don't care how they win. If they've got to, nut out a 1 point victory against this team, they'll be more than happy to do so. I think looking at that Cowboys bench again, Ben Hampton, for mine, he's just not in my 17 week to week. I look at the other players that are in my starting side and the fact that Granville's back, and I know, there's that element of risk there of, Granville not playing 80 minutes, especially first game back. But, when I've got someone like Blake Leary in my squad, he was captain of the Queensland Residents on the weekend. He's already played a couple of games for you this year. Yes, he is not a Jake Granville, but if you can push for a little bit more out of Granville, and I've got a Leary who can play in the middle, who's a much bigger body than Ben Hampton, when I'm coming up against a big pack like the Bulldogs, I think that's imperative that we make that happen. So, yeah, if I'm Paul Green, I'm picking Blake Leary over Ben Hampton every day of the week. Moving on to the second game, we've got the Dragons up against the Sharks. Second versus third, a very, very interesting clash. They're both on 12 points, so they'll want to make sure that they're staying with the Melbourne Storm as best they can. But, everyone knows it. Widdop's out for an extended period of time, and now Dugan's out. So he was the player that I was sort of speaking about the week before, who I thought was going to have to step up and really lead this Dragons team. And now that he's gone, it's going to be really interesting to see what Paul McGregor does with his lineup. Jai Field's been named on the bench to make his debut. It will be interesting to see if he starts there. I'm not sure what the tactic would be other than just taking a little bit of the wash out of the game, the speed out of the game. For a smaller guy, there's no hiding that fact that he's not the biggest bloke. But in saying that, I wouldn't be surprised, he does play one. Even though Nightingale did do a fair job when Dugan was out earlier in the year, I would not be at all surprised if Field started at fullback and then Milne came back off the wing and Nightingale returned to his wing spot. So, you look across the Sharks pack and it's starting to turn over. Most of those guys have played every game this year. They're starting to get their consistency. Chad Townsend and Maloney, they've won a comp together now. They're sort of getting over that, hangover, for lack of a better term, of Ennis and Barber departing. Valentine Holmes is starting to find his feet at fullback and really start to play into his jersey. It's a really tough one. I can't see where the Dragons are going to find answers when shit gets tough. As far as their outside backs, yes, Nana McDonald's been in good form. Ewan Aitken is as strong as a house. I always love watching that battle of the centres. Aitken and Bird. Ricky Latelli's in great form. I think he's probably the most underrated player, in my opinion, the most underrated player in the game at the moment. I love watching that bloke play. I'm pretty sure he's leading the tackle breaks in the competition, line breaks in the competition with 7 or 9 or something like that. He's playing some really, really good footy, entertaining footy. The Dragons, they won't want to go 3 in a row. It'll be 3 consecutive losses against top 4 teams. So, critics are going to come out and say, look, when push comes to shove, they were only beating teams that were below them. But in saying that, they did beat the Sharks earlier in the year. So that's probably, if anything, more fire in the belly of the Sharks to make sure that they play over the top of them, especially without Widdop and Dugan. They'll be pretty embarrassed if they get pants both games this season in, what is always such a great clash between these two clubs. For me, I think it's just a case of the Sharks going about their business. I know they haven't been convincing over the last fortnight, won in fairly controversial terms over the Tigers a fortnight ago and lost to the Titans before that. But again, if you're going off the back of form as well, they're both probably below par the last fortnight. And simply because Dugan's out as well, I'm just not sure where the creativity comes. It'll be an interesting battle in the forward pack. You know, both forward packs are massive and have big names. Well, not even so much Dragons, but their forward pack has just stood up this year is probably the better way to put it. Paul Vaughan and DeBellin, you know, definitely thrown their name forward for Origin. Frizzell, we know, is going to be there. Joel Thompson hasn't done himself any disfavours. Neither has Tarek Sims. But when you got blokes that are sort of the incumbents, I think Wade Graham will be thereabouts. For feeders, obviously going to be there. I think the Sharkies will probably win it in a close one for mine. On to the next game. Bit of a nothing game for me. Not really overly excited in seeing this one in the Tigers and the Rabbitohs. You know, you got 14th up against 13th. Both only three out of 9. You know, the Tigers, like, what do you say about that club this year? So much disruption. You know, now their captain's out, so Woods is out for that extended period of time with that groin injury, a hammy injury. I think you look on paper and the Rabbitohs, like, they've got a fucking good team. They should play over the top of these blokes. And I think that they'll have the opportunity to do that if the Burgess brothers stand up and say, look, there's a massive opportunity here. There's no Aaron Woods. We can bully the absolute shit out of this forward pack. And if they take that stance, they take that attitude and rip into this Tigers forward pack, you know, whilst it's not the most experienced backline in the Rabbitohs outfit, neither is the Tigers. I mean, I know, you know, Moses Suli, he's developing and he's a young fella and he played really well for Tonga last week. Nguama can finish really well. Obviously, we know the talent of Tedesco, but at the same time, like, it's sort of just that raw talent either side who's still finding their feet. But for mine, the one who splits it, who could be the make or break, would be Cody Walker. If the forwards really, really, really lay down that foundation well, and John Sutton gets that running game going like we seen when he played 6 a couple of weeks ago, Cody Walker could wreak some absolute havoc there. And yeah, you know, we don't have to remind ourselves that Robbie Farrell will want to get that win against his old club as well. So I don't know why, but call it just maths. Like, yeah, the Bunnies lost their last 3. They've just got to win. They need to find that win. Moving forward, they've got Melbourne over in Perth. So if they go 4 losses in a row, then they've got to travel all that way next week. It could get really, really dire really, really quickly for the Rabbitohs. Whereas I think it's going to be a case of good week, bad week for the Tigers. You know, it's just going to take a little bit of time, and knowing the fact that certain players are leaving, it's always hard to keep focus for extended periods of time. So for me, I think it's the Rabbitohs. I don't think they'll do it overly convincingly. So if they do win, I'd just be taking them at a 1-12 margin. Into our Saturday games. Potential to be a really entertaining game, this one. Our first game on Saturday between Penrith and the Warriors. You know, both have players that have very interesting attacking flair. Both teams had a number of players play rep footy last week, more so from Penrith in the City Country clash, and had a couple play for New Zealand, whereas the Warriors predominantly in the New Zealand colours and some of the other Pacific nations. But one thing that glares out to me is that, you know, you've got Tamari Martin named in that reserves list, and Bryce Cartwright's still at 6. You know, you've lost 5 in a row, and he hasn't done anything for you at 6. You know, the only time, like, they started getting a little bit of momentum against the Bronx when they started playing a bit straighter. But why not just use Cartwright as that straight? You know, getting back on the edge, play him in the back row, and let Cleary and Martin sort that out. You know, he's a ball runner. For me, he just plays He plays overs, looks to get that ball in that left hand, get the right hand fend, and then just throw that ball, flick it out the back. Like, for me, that's all he does. Yeah, and that's not a 6. You don't want that from a 6. You want someone who's going to be creative for you, who has a kicking game. He's too big. You need to utilise that size across the park. And if you can have a nippy, creative little fella who can finish games strong, like Martin can, I can't see how he's not in your side. So, yeah, if he's not a shock addition to this Penrith side, you just don't know. The only thing that's playing in Penrith's favour is the inconsistency of the New Zealand Warriors. I mean, they got away with a really, really good win in trying conditions against the Roosters last week, and they'll be looking to build on that win. You know, they've played really good footy over the last few weeks, even prior to that against the Storm and the Raiders. They were probably unlucky not to get another win out of those two games. But just looking at their record at Penrith, the Warriors, you know, they played a total of 18 games there. Penrith have won 10, Warriors have won 7. So it's not like they struggle to find a win there. They've had one draw as well. But, you know, I think now that Foran has signed with the Bulldogs, it's done and dusted. That'll be a big weight off his shoulders now that he knows what's happening moving forward. And I think just based off that, you know, yes, they didn't play very well, even though, you know, they have the rep level spine at 1, 6, 7, and 9, and they definitely underperformed last week. But I think it was just more of a case of momentum for the Aussies last week. You know, Johnson throws that pass, almost the exact same pass that he threw to Kenny Dow the week before in Clubland. And if that pass sticks and New Zealand score, all of a sudden it's 6-all. But the fact that it jumped to 12-0 so quick, I think Australia were just, you know, too experienced. They just know how to play from in front and make sure that they stick to their structures from there. So I look to Foran to come back in, full of focus, steady the ship and just guide them around. I think the leadership of Moylan is still a bit of an issue. It's just something that you can't ignore. As much as the senior players stand up and say, look, we've got his support and, you know, it's a lot of pressure for a young fella. Well, if it's that much pressure and it's that hard, like, fucking rip it off him. You know, I don't know why Peter Wallace isn't the captain, and the only reason why I think it is, I don't know, for whatever reason, you know, he was the one, Anthony Griffin was the coach that sacked him at the Bronx. So whether there's still something there where he doesn't have quite full faith in him or whatever that may be, I'm not too sure. It's pure speculation. Obviously, I'm not on the inside there, but when you've got leadership issues and you've got a number of senior players that could easily step into that role, and you've got a captain that's underperforming, you know, I'd be tempted to pull it off him. I'd be. I don't know why. Like, there's still plenty of you look on paper at that Penrith team, and they should play really, really well. Tyrone Peachy he's made 39 tackle breaks this year. I think he's sort of found his spot a little bit off the bench. I don't think it's been such a bad ploy now that Coach Griffin's finally left him on the bench, and you've left that setup of Hiku, Fare, Blake, and Zelezniak as your back four. You know, it's allowed him to at least understand his role and what's expected of him, and that it's like I've said before. It's just that consistency that players want. So at least they know their role. It might not be the role that he wants, but at least he knows what it is. Tarmel's still not really tossing up much. I think Regan Campbell-Gillard, you know, I've echoed praises for him over the last couple of podcasts, and I hope he continues on that way. You know, there's no reason, you know, Trent Merrin, now that he's got that taste of rep footy again for the year, hopefully he stands up and pulls his finger out his ass and really takes it to this pretty experienced Warriors forward pack. You know, to have someone like Ben Madalino coming off the bench, I know this will only be his third game back, but to have someone of that experience coming off the bench is a big plus for the Warriors. So, you know, I hope it is as an entertaining game as it presents itself to be on paper. But as we know, if games were won on paper, Warriors would probably be one of the most successful clubs in franchise history, which unfortunately isn't the case for them. But for me, I like the Warriors. I think Kieran Foran will come out and make a bit of a statement, and it's purely just off the back that Bryce Cartwright's still at 6. I don't like it. I'd have Tamari Martin there. Put him in the edge back row. He's a great edge back rower, and you've got so many good players there. To have someone like James Fisher-Harris coming off the bench because Cartwright's keeping him out of a team, and to have Harawira there, play Fisher-Harris in the middle, do what you got to do. But I don't think you ever get the best out of your team when you're putting talent in a team. You're not putting talented positions in positions. So yeah, that's just my take on that. And for that, I think that the Panthers may come undone and they'll continue on their losing way, unfortunately. The next game, wow, this really poses as an interesting game. The Storm and the Titans. First versus 12th. Look at, again, if we're looking on paper, it should be a whitewash, but we both know that that's not true, and that the Titans are in some really good form at the moment, having knocked off a couple of big players in the Sharkies. So, look, again, sort of getting back to the drug problem of Bromwich, who will be absent. They've missed him. I think he's already missed 3 games this year through injury. So, it's not like they're not used to playing without him. So I don't think that will pose too much of an issue. And we also can't ignore the fact of how well the Storm played for 60 minutes against the Dragons last time we seen them play. They put on an absolute clinic. And that was purely based off the kicking game and their numbers game to their edges. The fact that Slater, Vunivalu and Addo-Carr scored all their 6 tries just shows that the finishing capabilities of the Melbourne Storm is what's getting them the wins at the moment. It'll be interesting to see how that goes against someone like Anthony Don. He's a big, tall body. So those contests that Vunivalu finds himself in will be a little bit different this week. So I don't know. I think he'll be kept a little bit more quiet. So I think the Titans will fancy their chances in diffusing in that attacking prowess of the Storm. There's rumours that Dean Britt, who's been named in the reserves, who plays for the Storm Feeder Club at East, he played for the Queensland Residents on the weekend, scored a try, played really, really well. So that's what I'm hearing out of there. So Riley Jackson's been named at 17, but expect him to get sort of dropped off the back of that again. I think it looks like they're just going to keep persevering with this Munster-Cronk halves pairing. Again, I'm not convinced. I really like what I saw from Jacks. I know it's a bold call. You can't leave Munster out, but, he's played plenty of centre for the club when Slater was still on the scene and when he first came on the scene. And if you ask me, I think Munster's a better centre than Chase Blair, who's, a bit of a captain average bloke, doesn't do anything overly wrong, doesn't do anything, overly great either. He comes up with your clutch play every now and then, but, you compare him to Will Chambers in the other centre and, he's having a stellar year. So, for me, if I was picking the team, I'd have Jacks in the halves and I'd have Munster in the centres. We see Tohu Harris come back. He'll play his first game of the year after injury, and he had his first hit out for Sunny Coast, and he'll find himself a bit lucky. The footy gods are looking down on him a little bit. We see Christian Welch is gone for the season, and with Bromwich out as well, it gives him his opportunity. Would have been interesting to see what happened if Bromwich was in the lineup. Would Harris be there? And if Welch was there, would Harris be there? Or the fact that he has gone and signed with the Warriors, is that sort of an indicator that his days at the Storm were up? So, look for him to make the most of his opportunities off the bench, and it'll be interesting to see what sort of minutes he gets. You're not going to get a heap out of Glasby up front. So, I think the fact that Wallace and Ryan James are probably the form forward pairing of the comp, playing such big minutes as well, is a big plus. So, I think they'll fancy their chances in getting after Tim Glasby a little bit and making him work and seeing, you've got your edge-back roles in Kafusi and Bromwich up against McQueen and Greenwood. There's a bit of flair each way there. McQueen's pretty experienced. He played last week, so he's got plenty of game fitness back now that he's missed the start of the year through injury. But, yeah, there's heaps of interesting selections. Dale Copley off the bench, which potentially tells me that he may come on at some point at centre, and Hayne may play a bit of a roving role around the footy, which I hope is the case. It'd be really interesting to see how that dynamic would play out. So yeah, this one could go either way. The fact that they are playing Suncorp, it's that double header at Suncorp, so the Titans don't have to travel far. But mind you, you've got a lot of Queenslanders in that Melbourne Storm team who've played heaps and heaps of footy at Suncorp and won big clutch games there. So, it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. You wouldn't be looked at funnily if you were tipping a Titans upset, but at the same time, I don't think you can ignore the fact that Melbourne did still play really, really well for the majority of the game. Yes, Bellamy will just be disappointed that they switched off in the fashion that they did against the Dragons. But it just goes to show, that the quality side that the Dragons are this year, and the fact that they did have Dugan, who was steering the ship there too. So, pros and cons for both teams. A lot will be dictated around how they do use Copley. Again, if they do use him in that role that I've sort of just suggested, who knows what sort of havoc Hayne could wreak. But at the same time, a lot will be dependent around whether Wallace and James can really make a difference in playing over the top of that middle. So, and we may even be getting a cheeky little look at the Origin Nines as well. Smith up against Pete's. Pete's a big chance of getting that game one jersey for New South Wales. So he won't be holding anything back there. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting lineups across the board. Even Hayne and Harrell up against Chambers and Blair. There's a lot to be said about the defensive efforts of centres, and it's one of the hardest positions to defend in. So, it could just come down to who has a good day and who has a bad day. We've seen how well Dane Gagai had been playing, and Jared Hayne schooled him, to be honest. For me, just because it's so easy to tip the Melbourne Storm, they are expected to win so often. The fact that a number of their players have played at Suncorp so many times in big games, I think they'll just find a way. Even if Dean Britt does end up coming on to debut, and Tor Harris is only in his first game of NRL for the year, I think he'll just go out and do a job. Experience pays. So I think it'll be a really tight one. I wouldn't be surprised if Melbourne Storm have to do it the hard way, if they had to do it by a point, and even if they had to do it by a point in Golden Point. So I'm going to stick with the Storm just because of the results that they've showed us so far, but don't be surprised if the Titans get away with one. They were unlucky not to win at Suncorp a few weeks back against the Broncos. They lost it right at full time, so stranger things have happened. Into the second game of that double header, you've got Manly and the Broncos. So it's actually classed as a Manly home game, but clearly it's not. And it's a chance. It's a chance for Manly to crack the top four. They've been a bit of a surprise packet. A little bit different in the sense that I think they've flown under the radar a little bit, whereas the Dragons have very much stood out and been like, hey, we are actually here this year, and none of you gave us a chance. Whereas the Manly side haven't been quite as dominant, but they find themselves in sixth spot on 10 points in that big logjam. So they want to make sure it could go either way. This is a big game for them. If they win, they may find themselves up in the top four. If they lose, they could be right out of the 8. So yeah, this is a bit of a important week for a lot of clubs on defining where they start to break themselves up in that realm of just outside of top 4 or right out of the 8. So yeah, interesting couple of weeks coming up, and we'll start to see the pack sort of thin out a little bit, I think. They haven't had too much success at Suncorp, the Manly side. Their closest loss at Suncorp was 24 points, which was last year, and that's in their last 3 attempts. So yeah, there's still plenty of opportunity though for them. The Manly side, you've seen DCE's playing some good footy, as is Dylan Walker. The combination, even off the short king game of Blake Green and Dylan Walker, has been something to get excited about. And You've got James Roberts been named 18th man, which obviously tells us that, he may be an outside chance of playing this weekend. Whether that will get knocked on the head, we'll soon find out. They'll be hoping and praying that he will be back. He's single-handedly won them probably 2 games just with his speed. There wouldn't have been too many other players that could have scored a couple of the tries that he did. And at test level last week, we saw that, perhaps Jordan Carr, whose defensive skill probably isn't quite up to the standard that it needs to be, and the fact that he'd be defending on an opposite side of the field if he is to play in the centre as he has been named, spells danger signs. The space that could potentially be created for Brian Kelly, if he does play there, would give me a lot of confidence as a Manly supporter. And Kelly and Uado, they've scored 11 tries in 9 games as a centre wing combination. So, that could really pose a threat for Brisbane. But on the other side of things, the way that Darius Boyd runs that sweep play so well and stripping those numbers of defensive sides, Brian Kelly's going to have to be careful himself in how he goes about playing that defensively, because you're coming up against one of the greatest attacking players of the modern era. Another little plus for the Manly side, they've got young Georgie Fife for the Bronx, who's on debut. Played plenty of 20s for the Bronx, and played a little bit of Colts out at Wynnum when I was out there, and I've got the opportunity to see him play a few times. And he's a little cannonball, he's a little wrecking ball, and he doesn't hold back. He's a big thing for his age, and he's been playing some good footy for South, and I think it's a deserved role for him. So the Bronx will be happy that they've been able to convert a junior into another NRL player, and it'll be interesting to see. Wayne's known for at times getting blokes on debut but not using them if he doesn't need them. So even though he is there, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he didn't see any minutes, or if he only gets maybe the last something ridiculous 6 or 7 minutes, depending on the game's result. This is what we expect to be the Broncos probably last week without Ben Hunt. He should be back either next week or the week after. Nick has started to find his feet a little bit in that 7 role, given a bit more direction and go forward. But when you're coming up against Evans and Green, they'll be fancying their chances, and especially now that Dylan Walker's they've steered away from trying to make him a half and just said, hey brother, just play the position that you're meant to play. Stop being a dickhead and thinking you're something that you're not. So, it's good that he's found, starting to play the form that we've seen him in when he was in the Bunnies jumper, and that he's embracing that role now as well. It could go. It really could go either way. I'm going to tip a Manly upset 1-12, simply based off the form of the halves in that centre combination, and the fact that Kahu's defending in the centres. If James Roberts does manage to come back and he does get picked, I may lean back the other way and get on a Broncos 1-12. So it'd be just that defensive area. It's not so much what James Roberts would bring back. He's known to go pretty quiet when things aren't going his way. It's probably more what Jordan Kahu lacks in just what he's shown us in from last week with his defensive reads. Moving on to our last couple of games, we've got the Knights up against the Raiders. Again, it's probably another game that I'm not overly excited to watch. It's hard as a league fan to sort of get into watching the Knights. You hate to see a club struggling the way they are, and they do have a couple of young kids that do play some exciting footy. But when you produce the results that you are producing, it's hard to get excited. And I guess their biggest saving grace is that Josh Papali isn't playing. Because if I'm Brock Lamb or Jalen Feeney, I'm thinking, fuck, I've got these big bastards running at me. But, he's replaced by Sia Soliola, who will get his crack at the starting side. And Junior Paulo and Shannon Boyd, they're just fucking wrecking balls themselves. So, and just the short kicking game of Josh Hodgson is something that Danny Levi doesn't possess. So it's just all these accumulative 1%ers, again, week after week, that I struggled to find how Newcastle are going to put together an 80-minute performance that's going to get them the 2 points. Yeah, unfortunately, I know Nathan Brown sort of come out and said he's well aware that he's going to lose a lot more games than he's going to win. And, as long as he's seeing little bits of improvement here and there, but at the same time, even looking at the outside backs, so I guess one sort of exciting little lineup you've got is Rostock versus Jordan Rapana. But at the same time, if they're not working well from the inside and they're even able to isolate those halves, Joey Leilua, he just feels just going to have a field day along with the partnership that he has with Whitehead. That Whitehead, Leilua, Rapana. I think it's just going to cause some havoc there for him. And yeah, I just don't think that they're going to be up for the 80-minute challenge. Hodkinson's been named 18th man, so whether that does change and one of the forwards drops off the bench and Feeney may go back to the bench as he was used previously, but for me, yeah, Feeney's not an NRL half for mine. I don't see much of a future there for him. Just defensively, I know we've seen plenty of poor defensive halves in the past, but yeah, I don't really have much to say about this game. I think, yeah, that's pretty much the only plus for the Knights is the fact that Papali's out. It's one less wrecking ball that's going to be able to isolate that half and get at both of them. Both of them are pretty poor defenders. Yeah, I hate to be pretty blunt and uninsightful about this game, but I hope that they prove me wrong, and I hope that they are competitive and make a fist of it. But for me, if the Raiders get back on track and shake off the last couple of losses that they've had against the Dogs and Manly, who are both teams that are in good form, so it's not like they've lost to dud sides, but yeah, they'll be looking to get back into some form and leverage that off the back of Newcastle. Then into the final game of the round. This could be a really, really, really exciting game as well. Could be game of the round. Has the potential to be so, or I can tell you why it won't be. Important for both sides in the fact that after all this, if Parramatta managed to get a win and snake the Roosters, they could find themselves in the top 4. Something that a lot of people I don't think would have envisioned after a month of footy at the start of the season, where we were sort of just looking, when the fuck is Parramatta going to win a game? How are they going to win a game? And all of a sudden they've won 3. But, this is the but, their last 3, yes, they were pretty impressive against an understrength Cowboys team. They went out and did what they should have done, won quite comprehensively, 26-6. But prior to that, just managed to hold on and beat Penrith 18-12, and then even more so, won basically on the buzzer against the Tigers 26-22 the week before that. So 3 wins against some not so impressive teams in the competition at the moment versus the Roosters, who have been in some cracking games the last fortnight against the Dragons and the Warriors, both going down to 1 point. So whether that's going to take its toll, keeping in mind that a number of players have had the week off now from the Roosters, so they'll be fresh and ready to go. They won't want to lose either of the Roosters. The fact that they were in the top 4, they're just outside it now. Manly and the Bulldogs, big chances of winning. That could see them out of the top 8 if they lose this game. So could go either way. Big opportunity for the Eels to step up into the 4 if results go their way. If results don't go the Roosters' way, they could be outside of the 8. Bevan French has been named in the reserve, so there's potential there. I would suspect that Gutherson would knock Will Smith out of that side and play 6, and Bevan French would go back to 1. We see Latrell Mitchell come back now that Sean Kennydow has also been caught up in the drug rubbish of the sport at the moment, and to see 2 young kids in Mitchell and Manu on those centre pairings, it's exciting. It's exciting for the game, and I really hope that Latrell does come out and perform well. And you hate seeing these kids who only see success when things are going their way. They don't see the value of the lesson in adversity. I think that's one thing, one piece of advice that if I could give to any young up-and-coming player, it doesn't matter what level you're playing at, like, if something's not going your way, like, don't think that's the be-all and end-all. Like, try and find what you can learn out of the situation and how you can progress that forward and use it to your advantage. I think another big area where the Roosters have some positives moving forward is that forward pack of theirs. You know, Hargraves, Friend, Napa, Cordner, Orbison, Takeaho. If they can play with direction, speed, and ferocity, that's when this attacking flair, like you look at that Roosters team on paper and it's phenomenal. And, you know, yes, they should be fifth. They should probably even be higher with that team. And who knows, we could, again, be having a look at a potential Origin matchup in Pearce and Norman. I think Norman's a massive chance of being a step up for Thurston's absence in the Origin lineup. I'd be interested to see what you guys think about that comment. And again, you've got that attacking flair of those outside backs, Gutherson, Radradra, Jennings, even Hoffman's been a really good finisher of late. But at the same time, you look at someone like a Radradra and a Jennings, they work really well when things are going their way. Same with, you know, it's going to be a case of who lays the dominant platform first in the forwards, Roosters or Parramatta. Whoever does that, I think that's which backline has their field day. Outside of that, I think you're going to really, really struggle. So for me, that forward pack dominates in the Roosters' favour, and for me, I think the three in a row for Parramatta has been a bit of a fallacy, and I think they're in for a rude shock. And I'm going to tip the Roosters 13+. So that's my cheeky little sort of left of field, and that's my rationale behind it. I think the Roosters forwards will just dominate too much. So that's about all I got. It's good to be back and riffing everything rugby league again and get back into the groove of things. So yeah, good luck with all your tips and all your punning, and I'd be really keen to get some feedback on my comments right at the top of the podcast around the drugs in sport and my thoughts on it being more a societal problem as opposed to just a rugby league cultural problem. Just the way that we language things has a massive impact on how we use certain things and utilize certain situations. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents on that. But all in all, it's good to be back in the groove, and I hope you enjoy your rugby league and that your team gets its 2 points, because I am hoping and praying now as a Cowboys fan without JT that we can get the job done somehow in Sydney. So yeah, have a very safe weekend. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the start of next week for the review of round 10. Footy Rants out.